Hello and welcome to the show that debates and reconstructs burning issues of the day. This is The Big Picture and I'm Athar Khan. The Maldives' first democratically elected president Mohammad Nasheed resigned on Tuesday after weeks of protests over his decision to sack a judge he had accused of favouring the opposition. Vice President Mohammad Wahid Hassan was sworn in as president a short time later. Nasheed, the former political prisoner and human rights activist, was elected in 2008 when the Indian Ocean nation held its first democratic multi-party election following 3 decades of rule by autocratic leader Maumoon Abdul Gayoom. Last month, Nasheed ordered the army to arrest Criminal Court Chief Justice Abdullah Mohammed. The government alleged that the judge's rulings were politically motivated and symptomatic of a deep bias within the judicial system. New Delhi has formally offered assistance to Malé after the new president, Mohammad Wahid Hassan, called Prime Minister Manmohan Singh and said he was committed to upholding the constitution and the rule of law in his country. Dr. Singh has reportedly told the new president that India will stand by Maldives and is ready to provide any support or assistance, to the people of Maldives. But the situation in the island nation seems to be worsening, with street violence that started in Malé yesterday spilling over to other cities as well, as supporters of Nasheed clashed with the police in skirmishes in Malé as well as the second largest city of Adu. Interestingly, the Maldives police, a key player in events that led to the resignation of the deposed President Mohammad Nasheed, accused his party of fomenting terrorism as violence spread across the holiday resort archipelago. There are also reports of mobs loyal to Nasheed ransacking police stations and courts and scattered incidents of looting. Tonight on The Big Picture, we discuss the aftermath of the political unrest in Maldives, the strategic implications for India, as well as what the future holds for that island nation. And joining me in the studio is to my left, Kamal Mitra Chenoy from SIS in JNU, reputed security analyst, Major General retired Ashok Mehta, and Pramit Chaudhary, Foreign Affairs editor of the Hindustan Times. But I'd like to start the show with Mr. Chenoy, if I could. Now, one view of the abrupt resignation of Nasheed, especially by some observers across the border on our Western Front in some sections of that media, is that it was guided by India in a delicate maneuver amid, police-led anti-Nasheed protests to stave off any charge of intervention. Do you see this as wild speculation fueled by the quick support that New Delhi has given the new government there?
Well, I certainly, the two are incommensurate. If Delhi was willing to help, then Delhi would not have removed Nasheed, rendered him incapable of carrying on. So I think this is just fancy-free thinking. And Western side, they might generally have a tendency to blame India for whatever goes wrong, particularly in an island nation where there's a sizable Muslim population.
Majority. Right. General Mehta, coming to you, do you agree with that view?
Yeah, to some extent, but from the reports one has got, it appears, and I'm not sure how far this is true, because one of the biggest casualties in such a situation is accurate information. Now, you use the word that the government of India guided the situation. The interpretation of that is that the government of India apparently, on information that it had, made a judgment, a strategic judgment, that it was time for Mr. Nasheed to leave. And based on that judgment, it worked out this transition in which the vice president would take over and there would be a multi-party government, a transitional government, till elections were held. So to that extent, India is involved. Now, if that is true, then the government of India decided that Nasheed was dispensable because of the opposition that had grown over the weeks and the months, and it made that choice. Although I do agree with him that, or as a lot of other people are saying, that India should have stood by Nasheed, and because he was for the sake of democracy. But But the government has better information on what's
Obviously,
actually
obviously.
going on.
Yeah, yeah. And obviously, Abdul Gayoom, an autocratic leader, ruled the country for about 3 decades. Nasheed was the democratic choice. So you're saying New Delhi could have stood by Nasheed in a time of crisis. Obviously, fair point. But coming to Pramit now, the other view, obviously, is that India and New Delhi is concerned about the increasing Wahhabi influence in an island nation, which is obviously completely Sunni Muslim, and also Gulf money coming in. Now, how much of that is, first of all, true? And if it is, how much sleep should New Delhi lose over that?
Well, there is a very small Islamicist fringe in Maldives, but of the 3 major parties that we're looking at, Nasheed's and the 2 parties that are now ruling, none of them is particularly Islamic, and all 3 of them are pro-Indian. Let me make this very clear. There is a complete consensus within the Maldivian political leadership that the country that they take they basically base their entire policies on, and the capital that they look to first is New Delhi. When Nasheed 3 years ago announced a policy, an India first policy as the basis of his foreign policy, the other 2 opposition parties said, yeah, so we agree. That's not an argument in the Maldives. We all know that that's the truth. There's been a mild concern on the Indian side, but the political battle here is not about Islam. And Nasheed himself, you may remember, tacked at one point when he was struggling with these other 2 parties. He attempted to win over a certain degree of Islamic support by banning the spas, right? And then, of course, the hotel resort fellows showed up and said, look, Maldives has only one industry, which is tourism. So if you ban the spas, and we're finished. And so then he had to reverse the policy.
Right.
So the Islamic thing is something that all sides occasionally try to play, but it's not really the core of the problem. This is a battle between, it's effectively an intra-elite battle within in the Maldives.
But let me come up with a follow-up question on the rising hardliners inside Maldives. There's Abdul Gayoom's brother, or half-brother, I'm not sure which. He heads a faction of hardliners. Also, the hardcore Islamists also have been getting support from the past, over the past period when these protests came about. But why this sudden spurt of support for these hardliners and these hardcore Islamists? Why do you think that is? In a country which is largely pluralistic, has had a history of very pluralistic society.
Well, as I said, I don't think that I don't think that the core of the problem here is anything about Islam. There is an Islamic fringe, and what is happening is that because you have now effectively 2 centers of power, almost 3 centers of power, because the 2 opposition parties have swung back and forth in their support. Each group is now trying to woo what is effectively a fringe movement to buttress their own position. There is some evidence that if there is any cluster of Islamist support that is of any consequence, it tends to often sometimes be in the army and a little bit in the police, which makes them disproportionately important. But otherwise, Maldivian culture is very, very liberal. There's simply no reason for us to see that as a major political force.
Right. Mr. Chenoy, coming to you now. Latest reports from Mali suggest that there was a warrant out for Nasheed's arrest. Police and military personnel were on their way to his house to arrest him. He was holed up in a safe house first, then he went to his house. Now, Nasheed will most probably be in jail by the time this goes on air. He calls it a coup. Do you agree with that? Is it a coup, or is it just political unrest spilling over?
Well, if political unrest manifests itself in the police and the army coming in, then that's what a coup is called.
So you would agree that when he says it's a coup, a bloodless coup, it is a coup then?
Yes, it is a coup, because the normal mechanisms of government, of parliament, they have not functioned. It is the uniformed forces that have functioned. So it is a coup.
Right. Would you agree with that, General Mehta? You're the defense analyst here. Would you say
It's not an army-led coup.
It's a police, maybe, police mutiny.
It's neither is it. So I think it's a political coup because, again, you have to sift facts from fiction. Initially, if we are going by the script that we have heard, that the government of India guided this transition, and this is how it would work out. Obviously, it has not worked out like that, and it won't work out like that. Things never work out the way that you say or you're told they will work out. That's what is the difference between plans and how they turn out. So, if you're absolutely right, he'll be in jail, his defense minister will be in jail, and so the script that we were working to will go awry. And if that script goes awry, then there are two situations that will occur. That there will be this kind of violence that we are watching on the streets, because you also got reports that the Nasheed supporters have taken over 10 of those smaller islands and they've done this and that. So we don't know how much support is there for him on the streets. Pretty substantial from what you see on the TV. So therefore, you will have a situation, or you could have a situation, where there is violence of a very high order, which could lead to a kind of a civil war between the old regime
and the new one.
And the old regime, meaning the Gayyumists and the Nasheedists, which is the regime that has been dethroned now.
Right.
So
Fair point, General Mehta. We'll take a break right now. We'll come back and discuss lots more. Don't go anywhere. We'll discuss the strategic implications and security implications, if any, for India after the break. We'll be right back. Welcome back. You're still watching The Big Picture. Pramit, if I could come to you and ask you this. Other nations in the neighborhood, China, Pakistan, obviously have an interest in developing some sort of a base there. How important do you think having a presence of whoever's in charge in Mali, how important is it for us that that government, that regime doesn't have an anti-India stance, which is sort of colored by, say, China or Pakistan?
Well, insofar as India has a belief that the Indian Ocean area has to be, should be secured in the interests of India, Maldives is absolutely essential. If you look at the map, you'll see that the Maldives, while it's just a set of little dots on the map, but if you draw a 200-kilometer economic exclusion zone, or even a 50-kilometer sovereignty zone, around each of the 1,400 islands that the Maldives consists of, virtually all of the ocean area, from Sri Lanka, almost all the way down to Madagascar. In other words, a huge middle chunk of the mid-ocean is controlled by the Maldives. I mean, it's not controlled, but it's effectively there.
It's a very strategic location.
Exactly, that's right. So it's one of the reasons that India, for example, in the last Mali summit, the SAARC summit, one of the things that we did on the side of it was that Sri Lanka, India, and the Maldives would in fact begin the process of fusing their naval operations together, moving towards an interoperability and a common exercise program and so on, because the idea is that it's absolutely essential that Maldives security looks to India first on almost anything.
As they did in '88.
As they did in '88. And partly because of that memory, the Maldivians remember we were the ones who rescued them from a group of Lankan mercenaries attempting to take over. And the Maldivians are quite happy with this idea. And you may remember a year earlier than that, all of their naval radar bases were handed over to the Indian Navy. They just said, you run them. We're a tourist nation. We have really no interest in doing all of this. You handle it for us. So in many ways, this is a test for India. If we're going to be playing this type of a role with a lot of these small island countries, and we're going to be able to persuade them voluntarily to give this to us, we have to be able to keep them stable. I mean, we have to be able to say that, look, you can count on us to help you in such circumstances.
Right. Kamal, Mitra, Chenoy, how important do you think China and its role is going to be in the future now? Because it's a new government, it's a transitional government. How important do you think, do we need to keep an eye on China because they might just sneak through the back door?
I don't think we need to keep an eye on China because of the Maldives. We have to keep an eye on China and a number of other places.
Regardless, we need to keep an eye on them.
So, but I think that there is a dilemma for the Indian government. Do you let the Maldives decide their own problems themselves?
That's one.
Or do you intervene? And it's a tricky task, because if you intervene, you might annoy forces and build up then some kind of incipient anti-Indian resistance.
Anti-India sentiment, which we don't definitely want.
Yeah, which we don't want, and that is why I think no matter what some of the papers have been saying, we should be very cautious and careful and only act as intermediaries who are on either side,
Right.
if we are wanted.
Right. Do you agree, General Mehta? Intervene or just wait and watch?
No, I don't think we should wait and watch. As Pramit said, that it's strategically extremely important for India. It's a geostrategic location for one other reason, that from Western reports and our own intelligence reports, the Al-Qaeda initially and Lashkar-e-Taiba later have been trying to set up bases there. Bases meaning some training centers, getting new recruits from there.
Maybe a mole cell here and there.
No, this is far more serious. Although the Islamists are small in numbers, but don't forget this is a Muslim country, and given the fact that the Arab Spring is around, there are these urges towards Islamist movements, and if reports are to be believed, then there is a potential for Maldives turning in that direction. But the Chinese is the second factor. And the Chinese have been seeking bases. For a long time, they have been negotiating with the Maldivian government for some kind of a naval base, even a base for refitment, etc. So if you take all this and the fact that it sits on the sea lanes of communication in the Indian Ocean, all these make it very important. So I'm not sure whether we should wait for a situation. You see, if we are the regional power...
Like we'd like to believe, obviously.
No, there is no doubt that we are a regional power. So we have, to some extent, shape events. I mean, there's no point for us to say that it's an internal affair of that country. We intervened in Sri Lanka. For what reason? Because we believed then, I do not know whether we believe now, that we had our strategic interests and which were in danger of being disturbed. So, but now we have no doubt that we have very vital strategic interests there. And if there are powers that are inimical, and we are talking about the Chinese, and we are talking of forces that are favorable to the Pakistanis, then we have to shape events there, and I have no doubt that if things don't turn out the way India has scripted, and as we speak, the two fleets of the Indian Navy with the defense minister sitting on the Virat are somewhere in that region.
Right,
so it's by coincidence, certainly, but the Indian Navy, with all its strength, is carrying out its annual exercises there. So I think we should not just wait and watch, but have very good contingency plans to intervene. And again, you can always have reasons to intervene.
Fair point. Before we go into a break, very brief question to you, sir, if you could answer me briefly. This transitional government, Abdul Wahid that is heading, he's called up the US, he's called up New Delhi, he's called up everyone saying that, okay, listen, I'm going to keep democracy alive, I'm going to keep the government going. And he has also promised, I think, the US that he'll hold elections in 2013 as scheduled. Do you think he has the wherewithal to keep the peace in Maldives as of now? Very briefly, if you could.
I don't think he even has their ear, because they know they're not the main makers of policy in that region. So they're not going to be brought over by what he says.
But do you think he can keep the peace like he claims he can?
Well, if other forces intervene, he can't keep the peace.
Right. We'll come back to that and more after the break. We'll take another short break and discuss the future of the island nation. We'll be right back in a moment. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back. You're still watching The Big Picture. We're still discussing the unrest in the Maldives. Pramit, if I could come to you and ask you this. It is said that Mohammed Nasheed is obviously former human rights activist, green activist. He's a very honest man, but he's not an astute politician. Now, do you agree that Nasheed's mishandling of the situation of a situation that had religious overtones and his clash with the judiciary precipitated his ouster?
Well, having met Nasheed, I would argue before he was president. What's striking about him is one is that he's extremely intelligent. He's an extraordinarily lucid person. He can talk, and he's a novelist, and he can talk about Shakespeare, and he'll talk about modern contemporary fiction with remarkable ease. But the point is that he had to be of a certain rigid mentality to be able to fight the Gayoom government for over 20 years, including going to jail, being tortured. And so once he starts to get the idea that I'm on a certain moral position, he tends to get a bit rigid. And I think I would agree that making the transition to being a politician has been not easy for him, which tends to often happen.
With people
who could argue Mamata Banerjee is having the same sort of transition problem. And it's definitely the case that he was elected, his party was a minority, and he depended on other small parties, including the Dwivahi Kwame party, to back him. And then when his policies and theirs began to fall apart, they walked out, and he then said, doesn't matter, I'm still going to go and pursue it. And I know that the Indian government at one point did urge him. They said, look, as a country with a long democratic tradition, we'd just like to say that this is not the way. You've got to compromise every now and then. But I think the activist in him, if you wish, started to come into play. And that has led, in many ways, to exactly this situation. And you have to realize that a lot of the fellows who are now, he's fighting are people who were part of his government just 3 or 4 years ago. So there is definitely that element about it. On the other end, I would agree with Mr. Chenoy that if you're going to have a democracy, you've got to live within the parameters of the Constitution. You can't make an exception every time, otherwise you're just not going to be able to put this thing together. Right. So part of that problem now is this. I think 20 years from now we'll look upon this as teething problems of Maldivian democracy.
Of an emerging democracy.
Where Gayoom and Nasheed in particular despise each other. Obviously, one has put the other in jail and beaten him up. They're not going to have a good relationship. And that's part of the problem we're going to face. And so trying to ensure that the stability within the system is reinstated without forcibly intervening and without triggering a collapse of Maldivian democracy is going to be the real challenge for us.
Professor Chenoy, coming to you now. Nasheed received a legacy of an economic crisis almost from Gayoom. 30 years of his rule did actually. Maldivians have been protesting against soaring prices and everything. They had a dollar crunch a while back. Now, how much of the unrest do you think, in your opinion, is part of the worsening economic situation of the country, if at all?
Well, there is always a reaction if a country which really depends on tourism starts having high prices and inflation. But I don't think it's just that. I think that the political quagmire Pramit referred to, and an inability to work out compromises which are principled enough and acceptable enough to all. I think the president overplayed his hand. And in so doing, he did not understand the dangers of that. And that is why it's going to be very important that the situation there is stabilized. Because once it goes out of hand, then bringing it back together again and squashing the forces that would have taken opportunist advantage of it becomes very important.
Right, but do you think the situation is going to stabilize with Nasheed supporters clashing with the police, with Gayoom supporters? I mean, do you not see unrest continuing for the near future at all? I mean, how difficult is it for Wahid to stabilize it?
I think, as we were all discussing here, a friendly nudge from a big neighbor might do a lot of good. Right.
That's a fair point. General Mehta, I think you'd agree with that. A friendly nudge from a big brother, big neighbor is what's required?
Well, I go back to the script. It's the government of India has orchestrated this transition.
If?
I would believe so, that it has indeed. And because it didn't take more than a few hours for Dr. Manmohan Singh to be recognizing and offering full support. So the government of India has studied the situation, and as my two colleagues have said, that they found that because he overplayed his hand and he was dispensable. I think this overzealousness on his part to weed out the Gayumists, if I may call them, the old regime, without having the kind of political strength in a parliamentary system, was bound to recoil. And therefore, he could not manage the change at the pace that he was doing the change.
Right. I think also some of his supporters also deserted him after the clash with the judiciary.
Yeah. I believe that they undertook a number of reforms, but one area that they could not reform was the judiciary. I mean, most of those people are old regime walas, and therefore I think he should have been more patient. Strategic patience was missing, and therefore now the difficult question is, where does it go from here?
Right, absolutely. Let me stop you there. We have about 20 seconds left. Pramit, Paul, Chaudhary, wrap it up for us. Where does Maldives go from here? 20 seconds.
My guess is that the game is now going to be trying to constrain Nasheed's response, either through the Indian government's attempts at suasion, and I fear there's going to also be a degree of coercion, obviously, is already starting to happen from the government. And the game is to ensure that neither extreme goes too far, that we don't want Nasheed to completely go underground.
Absolutely.
And we don't want the Maldivian rulers right now to sit down and put all of his followers into jail.
We will have to stop there now, of course. Thank you so much, Pramit, for that. Very important lessons for India, and of course, like our panelists said, perhaps a slight nudge from a big brother, big neighbor, could perhaps stabilize things in that iron relation. That's all we have time for tonight on The Big Picture. Until next time, when you get you another edition of The Big Picture with another hot topic, this is Athar Khan saying goodbye, good night, and thank you for watching.